Hello, my name's Kenny Coventry. I'm based at the University of East Anglia, and I'd like to talk about some work we've been doing with the IPCC on how to communicate climate science information more effectively to a broad range of stakeholder groups. This is work done with colleagues at Irene Lorenzoni and Jordan Harold at UEA, but also Tim Shipley from Temple University in the US. The first thing we have to understand when presenting information in a way that somebody understands it is that human information processing is very, very limited. Let me give you an example. Here's a map of East Anglia. So the question is, how do people actually process this kind of map? And let me show you using a technique called eye tracking, where basically a camera monitors where the eye is looking at any given moment in time. So as you can see here, attention is really very limited. We have a very limited window that we sort of operate across the map, and understanding is a process of trying to piece together these snapshots of information that we're accumulating on a moment-by-moment basis. And that presents a real problem for presentation of information, because we have to ensure that people are looking where we want them to look so that they're retrieving the information that's most relevant to actually guide them to comprehension. Given that attention is so limited, one thing humans have evolved as a strategy is to use information in long-term memory to help process information at any given moment in time. So I'll give you an example from language. Answer this question: how many animals of each type did Moses put in the ark? Well, you probably, as most people do, might be thinking 2, that's easy. But in actual fact, Moses had nothing to do with the ark, it was Noah. So this Moses illusion example illustrates that information from long-term memory, what we expect to be the case, impacts how we actually understand what we see. And that's true with vision, but it's also true with language, as this example illustrates. What we've done is to take what psychological science tells us about how people understand and process information, and we've applied that to understanding of IPCC visuals, and we've developed a set of guidelines and principles to take visual representations and turn them into representations of information that are actually much, much easier to understand. IPCC graphics are really hard to understand. This was recognized by the IPCC a number of years ago, and at that point we started collaborating with them to work together with designers to try and produce visuals that are much, much more effective. So here's a couple of examples, draft examples of IPCC figures which people really find complicated to understand. If you're actually interested in following this up, we published a paper in Nature Climate Change in 2016 where we synthesized the psychological science literature and then come up with principles. In a nutshell, understanding is a combination of what's there in the world and what we bring to the situation from long-term memory. A good visualization or a good presentation of language, good presentation of information overall, is when the information in the graphic or in language coincides with the parameters people use from long-term memory to understand something. A difficult expression of understanding is when the graphic does not match the parameters that are in the person's head, in the comprehender's head at any given moment in time. Let me give you an example of how psychological principles can improve visual presentation. Take panel A here and say that the message involves a comparison of box plot 1 with box plots 2, 3, and 4. In A, no such comparison is invited in the visual representation. But there are a number of ways this can be done really effectively and really simply. In B, you can see that the size of box plot 1 is bigger than in the other 3, inviting comparison. In C, spatial isolation is used, so 1 is grouped apart from 2, 3, and 4, inviting comparison between 1, 2, 3, and 4. In D, there's a color difference. In E, an arrow is used to draw attention first to the box plot of interest. And in F, language is used, which also, like an arrow, draws attention to the box plot of most interest. I should say that attention is culturally mediated, and it relates to writing direction. In a language like English, we tend to read, well, we do read from left to right. Words appear from left to right in the page. As a result, attention starts to the left and then moves towards the right. But in many languages, attention goes in the opposite direction because the writing direction is the opposite way. For instance, in Taiwanese or Arabic, which are written from right to left, attention first of all starts from the right and then moves to the left. The MADE principles we developed, and there's a website link at the end of the presentation, really simple way of considering more effective presentation. So MADE is an acronym standing for message. Does the visual communicate a clear message? Audience, is a visual appropriate for the intended audience? Design, does a visual use evidence-based design principles of the type I've mentioned already? And evaluation, has a visual been tested with the audience? So basically, message, audience, design, evaluation. MADE can be unpacked into a bunch of more specific guidelines, and these are all available on our website, link at the end. So you can click on these and get some examples of how visual representations can be changed to be more effective. So let's return to an example from the IPCC. This is a draft figure that was produced by the design company for the IPCC, working with climate scientists, IPCC lead authors. It looks really nicely designed superficially. It's bright in terms of colors, it looks quite simple, nice geometric shapes and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, it wasn't designed in accordance with the MADE principles. And it turns out that it's actually very difficult for people to understand. The version on the right is the version produced applying psychological principles, the MADE principles, hopefully coming up with a version in draft that was going to be much easier to understand. So what we did was to take the MADE version on the right and compare it to the original version on the left, testing it with groups of policymakers, researchers that are non-expert, and so on and so forth. For example, we might ask a question such as the following: which economic sector is responsible for the largest proportion of emissions, accounting for both direct and indirect emissions? It turns out that testing such figures, policymakers in particular found the MADE version of the figure much, much easier to understand and comprehend than the original version of the figure. And that's also true for other groups, non-climate science research groups, or even interested others. So critical here is that we don't just apply the MADE principles, we then test different versions of the figures to ensure that one version is much easier to understand than the original version. The new version is better than the original version. And again, we can apply eye tracking to that, to figures, to check that people are attending to the information in the figures that's most essential to their understanding. Okay, thank you for listening. If you're interested in MADE principles and producing more effective visualizations or more effective linguistic communications about climate science, check out the website, tyndall.ac.uk, data visuals. Any questions, just get in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.